Fiji. Officially the Republic of Fiji, is an island country in Melanesia, part of Oceania in the South Pacific Ocean. It lies about 1,100 nautical miles north-northeast of New Zealand. Fiji consists of an archipelago of more than 330 islands, of which about 110 are permanently inhabited, and more than 500 islets, amounting to a total land area of about 18,300 square kilometers. The most outlying island group is Ono Ilau. About 87% of the total population of 924,610 live on the two major islands, Viti Levu and Vanua Levu. About 3/4 of Fijians live on Viti Levu's coasts, either in the capital city of Suva, or in smaller urban centers such as Nadi, where tourism is the major local industry, or Lautoka, where the sugarcane industry is dominant. The interior of Viti Levu is sparsely inhabited because of its terrain. The majority of Fiji's islands were formed by volcanic activity starting around 150 million years ago. Some geothermal activity still occurs today on the islands of Vanua Levu and Tevunai. The geothermal systems on Viti Levu are non-volcanic in origin and have low-temperature surface discharges of between roughly 35 and 60 degrees Celsius. Humans have lived in Fiji since the 2nd millennium BC, first Austronesians and later Melanesians, with some Polynesian influences. Europeans first visited Fiji in the 17th century. In 1874, after a brief period in which Fiji was an independent kingdom, the British established the colony of Fiji. Fiji operated as a crown colony until 1970, when it gained independence and became known as the Dominion of Fiji. In 1987, following a series of coups d'état, the military government that had taken power declared it a republic. In a 2006 coup, Commodore Frank Bainimarama seized power. In 2009, the Fijian High Court ruled that the military leadership was unlawful. At that point, President Ratu Josefa Iloilo, whom the military had retained as the nominal head of state, formally abrogated the 1997 constitution and reappointed Bainimarama as interim prime minister. Later in 2009, Ratu Epeli Nalatiko succeeded Iloilo as president. On September 17, 2014, after years of delays, a democratic election took place. Bainimarama's Fiji First Party won 59.2% of the vote, and international observers deemed the election credible. Fiji has one of the most developed economies in the Pacific through its abundant forest, mineral, and fish resources. The currency is the Fijian dollar, with the main sources of foreign exchange being the tourist industry, remittances from Fijians working abroad, bottled water exports, and sugar cane. The Ministry of Local Government and Urban Development supervises Fiji's local government, which takes the form of city and town councils. History. Pottery art from Fijian towns shows that Fiji was settled by Austronesian peoples by at least 3,500 to 1000 BC, with Melanesians following around 1,000 years later, although there are still many open questions about the specific dates and patterns of human migration. It is believed that either the Lapita people or the ancestors of the Polynesians settled the islands first, but not much is known of what became of them after the Melanesians arrived. The old culture may have had some influence on the new one, and archaeological evidence shows that some of the migrants moved on to Samoa, Tonga, and even Hawaii. Archaeological evidence also shows signs of human settlement on Moturuki Island beginning at least by 600 BC and possibly as far back as 900 BC. Although some aspects of Fijian culture are similar to the Melanesian culture of the Western Pacific, Fijian culture has a stronger connection to the older Polynesian cultures. The evidence is clear that there was trade between Fiji and neighboring archipelagos long before Europeans made contact with Fiji. In the 10th century, the Tu'i Tonga Empire was established in Tonga, and Fiji came within its sphere of influence. The Tongan influence brought Polynesian customs and language into Fiji. That empire began to decline in the 13th century. Fiji has long had permanent settlements, but its peoples also have a history of mobility. Over the centuries, unique Fijian cultural practices developed. Fijians constructed large, elegant watercraft, with rigged sails called drua, and exported some to Tonga. Fijians also developed a distinctive style of village architecture, consisting of communal and individual beret and veil housing, and an advanced system of ramparts and moats that were usually constructed around the more important settlements. Pigs were domesticated for food, and a variety of agricultural endeavors, such as banana plantations, existed from an early stage. Villages were supplied with water brought in by constructed wooden aqueducts. Fijians lived in societies led by chiefs, elders, and notable warriors. Spiritual leaders, often called bet, were also important cultural figures, and the production and consumption of yakina was part of their ceremonial and community rites. Fijians developed a monetary system where the polished teeth of the sperm whale, called tumbua, became an active currency. A type of writing existed which can be seen today in various petroglyphs around the islands. Fijians developed a refined Masi cloth textile industry, and used the cloth they produced to make sails and clothes such as the malo and the liku. As with most other ancient human civilizations, warfare, or preparation for warfare, was an important part of everyday life in pre-colonial Fiji. The Fijians were noted for their distinctive use of weapons, especially war clubs. Fijians used many different types of clubs that can be broadly divided into two groups, two-handed clubs and small specialized throwing clubs called ula. With the arrival of Europeans in the 17th century, and European colonization in the late 19th century, many elements of Fijian culture were either repressed or modified to ensure European, specifically, British, control. This was especially the case with respect to traditional Fijian spiritual beliefs. Early colonists and missionaries pointed to the practice of cannibalism in Fiji as providing a moral imperative justifying colonization. Europeans labeled many native Fijian customs as debased or primitive, enabling many colonists to see Fiji as a paradise wasted on savage cannibals. Authors such as Derek Scar have perpetuated 19th-century claims of freshly killed corpses piled up for eating and ceremonial mass human sacrifice on the construction of new houses and boats. In fact, during colonial times, Fiji was known as the Cannibal Isles. Modern archaeological research conducted on Fijian sites has shown that Fijians did in fact practice cannibalism, which has helped modern scholars to assess the accuracy of some of these colonial European accounts. Studies conducted by scholars including D. Gusta Cochrane and Jones provide evidence of burnt or cut human skeletons, suggesting that cannibalism was practiced in Fiji. However, these archaeological accounts indicate that cannibalistic practices were likely more intermittent and less ubiquitous than European settlers had implied. It appears that the cannibalism may more often have been nonviolent and ritualistic. Early interaction with Europeans. Dutch explorer Abel Tasman was the first known European visitor to Fiji, sighting the northern island of Vanuatu and the North Tavunai archipelago in 1643 while looking for the great southern continent. James Cook, the British navigator, visited one of the southern Lau Islands in 1774. It was not until 1789, however, that the islands were charted and plotted, when William Bligh, the castaway captain of HMS Bounty, passed Ovolo and sailed between the main islands of Viti Levu and Vanuatu en route to Batavia, in what is now Indonesia. Bligh Water, the strait between the two main islands, is named after him, and for a time, the Fiji Islands were known as the Bligh Islands. The first Europeans to maintain substantial contact with the Fijians were sandalwood merchants, whalers, and bêche de mer traders. The first whaling vessel known to have visited was the N Hope in 1799, and she was followed by many others in the 19th century. These ships came for drinking water, food, and firewood and, later, for men to help man their ships. Some of the Europeans who came to Fiji in this period were accepted by the locals and were allowed to stay as residents. By the 1820s, Levuka was established as the first European-style town in Fiji, on the island of Ovalo. The market for bêche de mer in China was lucrative, and British and American merchants set up processing stations on various islands. Local Fijians were utilized to collect, prepare, and pack the product which would then be shipped to Asia. A good cargo would result in a half-yearly profit of around 25,000 for the dealer. The Fijian workers were often given firearms and ammunition as an exchange for their labor, and by the end of the 1820s most of the Fijian chiefs had muskets and many were skilled at using them. Some Fijian chiefs soon felt confident enough with their new weapons to forcibly obtain more destructive weaponry from the Europeans. In 1834, men from Viwa and Bau were able to take control of the French ship L'Amiable Josephine and use its cannon against their enemies on the Reva River, although they later ran it aground. Christian missionaries like David Cargill also arrived in the 1830s from recently converted regions such as Tonga and Tahiti, and by 1840 the European settlement at Levuka had grown to about 40 houses with former whaler David Whippy being a notable resident. The religious conversion of the Fijians was a gradual process which was observed firsthand by Captain Charles Wilkes of the United States Exploring Expedition. Wilkes wrote that all the chiefs seemed to look upon Christianity as a change in which they had much to lose and little to gain. Christianized Fijians, in addition to forsaking their spiritual beliefs, were pressured into cutting their hair short, adopting the Sulu form of dress from Tonga and fundamentally changing their marriage and funeral traditions. This process of enforced cultural change was called lotu. Intensification of conflict between the cultures increased, and Wilkes was involved in organizing a large punitive expedition against the people of Malilo. He ordered an attack with rockets which acted as makeshift incendiary devices. The village, with the occupants trapped inside, quickly became an inferno, with Wilkes noting that the shouts of men were intermingled with the cries and shrieks of the women and children as they burned to death. Wilkes demanded the survivors should sue for mercy, and if not they must expect to be exterminated. Around 57 to 87 Malolone people were killed in this encounter. Kingdom of Fiji. After the collapse of the Confederacy, Enel Mafu established a stable administration in the Lau Islands and the Tongans. Other foreign powers such as the United States were considering the possibility of annexing Fiji. This situation was not appealing to many settlers, almost all of whom were British subjects from Australia. Britain, however, refused to annex the country, and a compromise was needed. In June 1871, George Austin Woods, an ex-lieutenant of the Royal Navy, managed to influence Kakabo and organize a group of like-minded settlers and chiefs into forming a governing administration. Kakabo was declared the monarch and the Kingdom of Fiji was established. Most Fijian chiefs agreed to participate, and even Mauafu chose to recognize Kakabo and participate in the constitutional monarchy. However, many of the settlers had come from Australia, where negotiation with the indigenous people almost universally involved coercing them to accept very unfavorable terms. These settlers' expectation of dominating by force led them to form several aggressive, racially motivated groups, such as the British Subjects Mutual Protection Society. One group called themselves the Ku Klux Klan in homage to the white supremacist group in America. However, when respected individuals such as Charles St. Julian, Robert Cherson Swanston and John Bates Thurston were appointed by Kakabo, a degree of authority was established. With the rapid increase in white settlers entering the country, the desire for land acquisition also intensified. Once again, Conflict with the Kai Colorado in the interior of Viti Levu ensued. In 1871, the killing of 2 settlers near the Ba River in the northwest of the island prompted a large punitive expedition of white farmers, imported slave laborers, and coastal Fijians to be organized. This group of around 400 armed vigilantes, including veterans of the U.S. Civil War, had a battle with the Kai Colorado near the village of Kubu, in which both sides had to withdraw. The village was destroyed, and the Kai Colorado, despite being armed with muskets, received numerous casualties. The Kai Colorado responded by making frequent raids on the settlements of the whites and Christian Fijians throughout the district of Ba. Likewise, in the east of the island on the upper reaches of the Reva River, villages were burnt, and many Kai Colorado were shot by the vigilante settler squad called the Reva Rifles. Although the Kakabo government did not approve of the settlers taking justice into their own hands, it did want the Kai Colorado subjugated and their land sold. The solution was to form an army. Robert S. Swanston, the Minister for Native Affairs in the kingdom, organized the training and arming of suitable Fijian volunteers and prisoners to become soldiers in what was variably called the King's Troops or the Native Regiment. In a similar system to the native police that was present in the colonies of Australia, 2 white settlers, James Harding and W. Fitzgerald, were appointed as the head officers of this paramilitary brigade. The formation of this force did not sit well with many of the white plantation owners, as they did not trust an army of Fijians to protect their interests. The situation intensified further in early 1873 when the Burns family was killed by a Kai Colorado raid in the Ba River area. The Kakabo government deployed 50 King's troopers to the region under the command of Major Fitzgerald to restore order. The local whites refused their posting, and deployment of another 50 troops under Captain Harding was sent to emphasize the government's authority. To prove the worth of the native regiment, this augmented force went into the interior and massacred about 170 Kai Colorado people at Nakorowawi. Upon returning to the coast, the force was met by the white settlers who still saw the government troops as a threat. A skirmish between the government's troops and the white settlers' brigade was only prevented by the intervention of Captain William Cox Chapman of HMS Dido, who detained the settlers' leaders, forcing the group to disband. The authority of the King's troops and the Kakabo government to crush the Kai Colorado was now total. From March to October 1873, a force of about 200 King's troops under the general administration of Swanston with around 1,000 coastal Fijian and white volunteer auxiliaries, led a campaign throughout the highlands of Viti Levu to annihilate the Kai Colorado. Major Fitzgerald and Major H.C. Thurston led a 2-pronged attack throughout the region. The combined forces of the different clans of the Kai Colorado made a stand at the village of Nakuli. The Kai Colorado were defeated, with dynamite and fire being used to flush them out from their defensive positions amongst the mountain caves. Many Kai Colorado were killed, and one of the main leaders of the hill clans, Radudradra, was forced to surrender, with around 2,000 men, women, and children being taken prisoner and sent to the coast. In the months after this defeat, the only main resistance was from the clans around the village of Nabutata. Major Thurston crushed this resistance in the 2 months following the battle at Nakuli. Villages were burnt, Kai Colorado were killed, and a further large number of prisoners were taken. About 1,000 of the prisoners were sent to Levuka, where some were hanged and the rest were sold into slavery and forced to work on various plantations throughout the islands. Colonization. Despite achieving military victories over the Kai Colorado, the Kakabo government was faced with problems of legitimacy and economic viability. Indigenous Fijians and white settlers refused to pay taxes, and the cotton price had collapsed. With these major issues in mind, John Bates Thurston approached the British government, at Kakabo's request, with another offer to cede the islands. The newly elected Tory British government under Benjamin Disraeli encouraged expansion of the empire and was therefore much more sympathetic to annexing Fiji than it had been previously. The murder of Bishop John Pattison of the Melanesian mission at Nukapu in the Reef Islands had provoked public outrage, which was compounded by the massacre by crew members of more than 150 Fijians on board the brig Carl. 2 British commissioners were sent to Fiji to investigate the possibility of an annexation. The question was complicated by maneuverings for power between Kakabo and his old rival, Maafua, with both men vacillating for many months. On March 21, 1874, Kakabo made a final offer, which the British accepted. On September 23, Sir Hercules Robinson, soon to be appointed the British governor of Fiji, arrived on HMS Dido and received Kakabo with a royal 21-gun salute. After some vacillation, Kakabo agreed to renounce his Tuiviti title, retaining the title of Vunavalu, or protector. The formal session took place on October 10, 1874, when Kakabo, Maafua, and some of the senior chiefs of Fiji signed 2 copies of the deed of cession. Thus the colony of Fiji was founded. 96 years of British rule followed. Gordon decided in 1878 to import indentured labourers from India to work on the sugar cane fields that had taken the place of the cotton plantations. The 463 Indians arrived on May 14, 1879, the first of some 61,000 that were to come before the scheme ended in 1916. The plan involved bringing the Indian workers to Fiji on a 5-year contract, after which they could return to India at their own expense. If they chose to renew their contract for a second 5-year term, they would be given the option of returning to India at the government's expense, or remaining in Fiji. The great majority chose to stay. The Queensland Act, which regulated indentured labour in Queensland, was made law in Fiji also. Between 1879 and 1916, tens of thousands of Indians moved to Fiji to work as indentured labourers, especially on sugar cane plantations. Given the steady influx of ships carrying indentured Indians to Fiji up until 1916, repatriated Indians generally boarded these same ships on their return voyage. The total number of repatriates under the Fiji indenture system is recorded as 39,261, while the number of arrivals is said to have been 60,553. Because the return figure includes children born in Fiji, many of the indentured Indians never returned to India. World War I and II. Fiji was only peripherally involved in World War I. One memorable incident occurred in September 1917 when Count Felix von Luckner arrived at Wakea Island, off the eastern coast of Viti Levu, after his raider, SMS Seidler, had run aground in the Cook Islands following the shelling of Papeete in the French colony of Tahiti. On September 21, the district police inspector took a number of Fijians to Wakea, and von Luckner, not realizing that they were unarmed, unwittingly surrendered. Citing unwillingness to exploit the Fijian people, the colonial authorities did not permit Fijians to enlist. One Fijian of chiefly rank, a great-grandson of Kakabo, joined the French Foreign Legion and received France's highest military decoration, the Croix de Guerre. After going on to complete a law degree at Oxford University, this same chief returned to Fiji in 1921 as both a war hero and the country's first ever university graduate. In the years that followed, Ratu Sirlala Sukuna, as he was later known, established himself as the most powerful chief in Fiji and forged embryonic institutions for what would later become the modern Fijian nation. By the time of World War II, the United Kingdom had reversed its policy of not enlisting natives, and many thousands of Fijians volunteered for the Fiji Infantry Regiment, which was under the command of Ratu Sir Edward Kakabo, another great-grandson of Kakabo. The regiment was attached to New Zealand and Australian Army units during the war. Because of its central location, Fiji was selected as a training base for the Allies. An airstrip was built at Nadi, and gun emplacements studded the coast. Fijians gained a reputation for bravery in the Solomon Islands campaign, with one war correspondent describing their ambush tactics as death with velvet gloves. Corporal Sifanea Sukana Ivalu, of Yukata, was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, as a result of his bravery in the Battle of Bougainville. Independence. The British granted Fiji independence in 1970. Democratic rule was interrupted by two military coups in 1987, precipitated by a growing perception that the government was dominated by the Indo-Fijian community. The second 1987 coup saw both the Fijian monarchy and the Governor-General replaced by a non-executive president, and the name of the country changed from Dominion of Fiji to Republic of Fiji, and then in 1997 to Republic of the Fiji Islands. The two coups and the accompanying civil unrest contributed to heavy Indo-Fijian emigration. The resulting population loss resulted in economic difficulties and ensured that Melanesians became the majority. In 1990, the new constitution institutionalized ethnic Fijian domination of the political system. The Group Against Racial Discrimination was formed to oppose the unilaterally imposed constitution and to restore the 1970 constitution. In 1992, Sitiveni Rabuka, the lieutenant colonel who had carried out the 1987 coup, became prime minister following elections held under the new constitution. 3 years later, Rabuka established the Constitutional Review Commission, which in 1997 wrote a new constitution which was supported by most leaders of the indigenous Fijian and Indo-Fijian communities. Fiji was readmitted to the Commonwealth of Nations. In 2000, a coup was instigated by George Speight, which effectively toppled the government of Mahendra Chaudhry, who in 1997 had become the country's first Indo-Fijian prime minister following the adoption of the new constitution. Commodore Frank Bainimarama assumed executive power after the resignation, possibly forced, of President Ratu Serkami Sisimara. Later in 2000, Fiji was rocked by two mutinies when rebel soldiers went on a rampage at Suva's Queen Elizabeth Barracks. The High Court ordered the reinstatement of the Constitution, and in September 2001, to restore democracy, a general election was held which was won by interim Prime Minister Lesnia Kara's Soko Duavata Ni Luni Vanua party. In 2005, the Kara's government, amid much controversy, proposed a Reconciliation and Unity Commission with power to recommend compensation for victims of the 2000 coup and amnesty for its perpetrators. However, the military, especially the nation's top military commander, Frank Bainimarama, strongly opposed this bill. Bainimarama agreed with detractors who said that to grant amnesty to supporters of the present government who had played a role in the violent coup was a sham. His attack on the legislation, which continued unremittingly throughout May and into June and July, further strained his already tense relationship with the government. In late November and early December 2006, Bainimarama was instrumental in the 2006 Fijian coup d'état. Bainimarama handed down a list of demands to Kara's after a bill was put forward to Parliament, part of which would have offered pardons to participants in the 2000 coup attempt. He gave Kara's an ultimatum date of December 4 to accede to these demands or to resign from his post. Kara's adamantly refused either to concede or resign, and on December 5 President Ratu Josefa Iloilo signed a legal order dissolving the parliament after meeting with Bainimarama. Citing corruption in the government, Bainimarama staged a military takeover on December 5, 2006 against the prime minister that he had installed after a 2000 coup. The Commodore took over the powers of the presidency and dissolved the parliament, paving the way for the military to continue the takeover. The coup was the culmination of weeks of speculation following conflict between the elected prime minister, Lesnia Kara's, and Bainimarama. Bainimarama had repeatedly issued demands and deadlines to the Prime Minister. A particular issue was previously pending legislation to pardon those involved in the 2000 coup. Bainimarama named Jonas Sinalagakalai as caretaker Prime Minister. The next week Bainimarama said he would ask the Great Council of Chiefs to restore executive powers to the President, Ratu Josefa Iloilo. On January 4, 2007, the military announced that it was restoring executive power to Iloilo, who made a broadcast endorsing the actions of the military. The next day, Iloilo named Bainimarama as the interim prime minister, indicating that the military was still effectively in control. In the wake of the takeover, reports emerged of alleged intimidation of some of those critical of the interim regime. 2009 Transfer of power. In April 2009, the Fiji Court of Appeal overturned the High Court decision that Bainimarama's takeover of Karaiz's government was lawful and declared the interim government to be illegal. Bainimarama agreed to step down as interim prime minister immediately, along with his government, and President Iloilo was to appoint a new prime minister. President Iloilo abrogated the constitution, and removed all office holders under the constitution including all judges and the governor of the central bank. In his own words, he appointed himself as the head of the state of Fiji under a new legal order. He then reappointed Bainimarama under his new order as interim prime minister and imposed a public emergency regulation limiting internal travel and allowing press censorship. On May 2, 2009, Fiji became the first nation ever to have been suspended from participation in the Pacific Islands Forum, for its failure to hold democratic elections by the date promised. Nevertheless, it remains a member of the forum. On September 1, 2009, Fiji was suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations. The action was taken because Bainimarama failed to hold elections by 2010 as the Commonwealth of Nations had demanded after the 2006 coup. Bainimarama stated a need for more time to end a voting system that heavily favored ethnic Fijians at the expense of the multi-ethnic minorities. Critics claimed that he had suspended the constitution and was responsible for human rights violations by arresting and detaining opponents. In his 2010 New Year's address, Bainimarama announced the lifting of the public emergency regulations. However, the PER was not rescinded until January 2012, and the Suva Philosophy Club was the first organization to reorganize and convene public meetings. The PER had been put in place in April 2009 when the former constitution was abrogated. The PER had allowed restrictions on speech, public gatherings, and censorship of news media and had given security forces added powers. He also announced a nationwide consultation process leading to a new constitution under which the 2014 elections were held. The official name of the country was reverted to Republic of Fiji in February 2011. On March 14, 2014, the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group voted to change Fiji's full suspension from the Commonwealth of Nations to a suspension from the Councils of the Commonwealth, allowing them to participate in a number of Commonwealth activities, including the 2014 Commonwealth Games. The suspension was lifted in September 2014. The Fiji First Party, led by Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama, won outright majority in the country's 51-seat parliament both in 2014 election and narrowly in 2018 election. In October 2021, Tuimakuata Ratu Wailiami Kitanavir was elected the new president of Fiji by the parliament. On December 24, 2022, Sitiveni Rabuka, the head of the People's Alliance, became Fiji's 12th prime minister, succeeding Bainimarama, following the December 2022 general election. Fiji lies approximately 5,100 kilometers southwest of Hawaii and roughly 3,150 kilometers from Sydney, Australia. Fiji is the hub of the Southwest Pacific, midway between Vanuatu and Tonga. The archipelago is located between 176 degrees 53 minutes east and 178 degrees 12 minutes west. The archipelago is roughly 498,000 square miles and less than 2% is dry land. The 180 degrees meridian runs through Tavunai, but the international date line is bent to give uniform time to all of the Fiji group. With the exception of Rotuma, the Fiji group lies between 15 degrees 42 minutes and 20 degrees 02 south. Rotuma is located 220 nautical miles north of the group, 360 nautical miles from Suva, 12 degrees 30 minutes south of the equator. Fiji covers a total area of some 194,000 square kilometers, of which around 10% is land. Fiji consists of 332 islands and 522 smaller islets. The two most important islands are Viti Levu and Vanua Levu, which account for about 3/4 of the total land area of the country. The islands are mountainous, with peaks up to 1,324 meters, and covered with thick tropical forests. The highest point is Mount Tamanavi on Viti Levu. Viti Levu hosts the capital city of Suva and is home to nearly 3/4 of the population. Other important towns include Nadi, and Lautoka, Fiji's second largest city with large sugar cane mills and a seaport. The main towns on Vanua Levu are Labasa and Savosavua. Other islands and island groups include Tavunai and Katavua, the Mamanika group and Yasawa group, which are popular tourist destinations, the Lomavitai group, off Suva, and the remote Lau group. Rotuma has special administrative status in Fiji. Siva Ira, an uninhabited reef, is located about 250 nautical miles southwest of the main archipelago. Fiji contains two ecoregions, Fiji tropical moist forests and Fiji tropical dry forests. It had a 2018 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 8.3510, ranking it 24th globally out of 172 countries. Economy. Endowed with forest, mineral, and fish resources, Fiji is one of the most developed of the Pacific Island economies, though still with a large subsistence sector. Some progress was experienced by the sector when Marian M. Gani introduced credit unions to the islands in the 1950s. Natural resources include timber, fish, gold, copper, offshore oil, and hydropower. Fiji experienced a period of rapid growth in the 1960s and 1970s but stagnated in the 1980s. The coups of 1987 caused further contraction. Economic liberalization in the years following the coups created a boom in the garment industry and a steady growth rate despite growing uncertainty regarding land tenure in the sugar industry. The expiration of leases for sugar cane farmers along with reduced farm and factory efficiency has led to a decline in sugar production despite subsidies for sugar provided by the EU. Fiji's gold mining industry is based in Vatukoula. Urbanization and expansion in the service sector have contributed to recent GDP growth. Sugar exports and a rapidly growing tourist industry, with tourists numbering 430,800 in 2003 and increasing in the subsequent years, are the major sources of foreign exchange. Fiji is highly dependent on tourism for revenue. Sugar processing makes up 1/3 of industrial activity. Long-term problems include low investment and uncertain property rights. The South Pacific Stock Exchange is the only licensed securities exchange in Fiji and is based in Suva. Its vision is to become a regional exchange. Languages. Fiji has 3 official languages under the 1997 Constitution: English, Fijian, and Hindi. Fijian is an Austronesian language of the Malayo-Polynesian family spoken in Fiji. It has 350,000 native speakers, and another 200,000 speak it as a second language. There are many dialects of the language across the Fiji Islands, which may be classified in two major branches: Eastern and Western. Missionaries in the 1840s chose an Eastern dialect, the speech of Bow Island, to be their written standard of the Fijian language. Bow Island was home to Seru Epinasa Kakabo, the chief who eventually became the self-proclaimed King of Fiji. Fiji Hindi, also known as Fijian Bait or Fijian Hindustani, is the language spoken by most Fijian citizens of Indian descent. It is derived mainly from the Awadhi and Bhojpuri varieties of Hindi. It has also borrowed a large number of words from Fijian and English. The relation between Fiji Hindi and Standard Hindi is similar to the relation between Afrikaans and Dutch. Indian indentured laborers were initially brought to Fiji mainly from districts of eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, northwest frontier, and South India, such as from Andhra and Tamil Nadu. They spoke numerous, mainly Hindi, dialects and languages depending on their district of origin. English, a remnant of British colonial rule over the islands, was the sole official language until 1997 and is widely used in government, business, and education as a lingua franca. Religion. According to the 2007 census, 64% of the population was Christian, while 29% was Hindu, 6% Muslim, 0.5% Sikh, and the remaining 0.5% belonged to other religions. The largest Christian denomination is the Methodist Church of Fiji and Rotuma. With 34% of the population, including almost two-thirds of ethnic Fijians, the proportion of the population adhering to Methodism is higher in Fiji than in any other nation. Fijian Catholics are administered by the Archdiocese of Suva. The Archdiocese is the metropolitan see of an ecclesiastical province which includes the dioceses of Rarotonga on the Cook Islands, for those and Niue, both New Zealand associated countries, and Tarawa and Nauru with see at Tarawa on Kiribati, also for Nauru, and the Mission Sui Iris of Tokelau. The Assemblies of God and the Seventh-day Adventist denominations are significantly represented. Fiji is the base for the Anglican Diocese of Polynesia. These and other denominations have small numbers of Indo-Fijian members. Christians of all kinds comprised 6% of the Indo-Fijian population in the 1996 census. Hindus in Fiji mostly belong to the Sanatan sect or else are unspecified. Muslims in Fiji are mostly Sunni. Culture. While indigenous Fijian culture and traditions are very vibrant and are integral components of everyday life for the majority of Fiji's population, Fijian society has evolved over the past century with the introduction of traditions such as Indian and Chinese, as well as significant influences from Europe and Fiji's Pacific neighbors, particularly Tonga and Samoa. Thus, the various cultures of Fiji have come together to create a unique multicultural national identity. Fiji's culture was showcased at the World Exposition held in Vancouver, Canada, in 1986 and more recently at the Shanghai World Expo 2010, along with other Pacific countries in the Pacific Pavilion.